Do a little adding, do a little subtraction, get math tonight. We're going to do math tonight. All right, that was really cheesy. Okay, this next lesson in chapter 10 is all about our extension. So extension lessons, remember, is just a little bit added on to the last couple of lessons. Not a very big lesson. It's going to be a quick video, and it's just no on your owns, just a little thing to kind of add. This is all about choosing which measures to pick to describe data. So we have all these different things we know how to find now. We know how to find the mean, the median, the mode, the range, the interquartile range, the first quartile, the third quartile, all these different things. The mean absolute deviation. What the heck? When do we need these things? When do we use these things? That's what this lesson's all about. So in our books, we're on page 456, and our learning target's going to say, I can choose the most appropriate measure to describe our data. So that's what we're going to start with. I can choose the most appropriate measure to describe data. All right, so we've got all these different things we've learned in chapter 9 and now in chapter 10. What do we do with them? When do we use them? So we're going to head this part of our notes, choosing appropriate measures. And this is kind of like a very easy hint. If you write these hints down, you will always get these correct when doing this kind of work. So at the top of page 456, it says you can use a measure of center and a measure of variation to describe distributions of data. So if you think about that, if you look at a graph, you can try to find a center point, and you can also figure out how spread out or close together the data is. That's two different things. The shape of the distribution can help you choose which measures that you should pick. So we're going to write that underneath here. The shape of the graph, and we talked about this in the last lesson. Remember, if it's skewed right or skewed left or symmetric, okay, helps to pick the measure most appropriate. So the shape is huge, okay? So here's a big asterisk right here, okay? So key idea, 456, it says choosing appropriate measures. The mean absolute deviation uses the mean in its calculation. So when a data distribution is symmetric, here's what we do. We're going to pick the mean to describe the center of the graph, and we're going to pick the MAD, or the mean absolute deviation, to describe the variation of the graph. So here's what happens when you have a symmetric graph. If we want to describe the center, we're going to pick the mean. The mean does a really good job of describing the center of a graph that's symmetric. If we want to describe the variation, or how spread out our data is, we're going to pick the MAD. And remember, that's an abbreviation for the mean absolute deviation. Those are the measures that we're going to pick to describe a symmetric graph. Now, what if our graph is not symmetric? So here's the other item. If our data is skewed, so we're going to put skewed. If we have a skewed graph, and this doesn't matter which way, if it's skewed to the right or if it's skewed to the left, if we are trying to describe the center of a skewed graph, it says in the key idea box, we're going to use the median to describe the center. We're going to pick the median. And if we're trying to figure out the variation of a graph that's skewed, how spread out or close together things are, we're going to use the IQR. And remember, that's an abbreviation for interquartile range. So basically, that gives you everything you need to know right there. First, you need to know what kind of graph is it, symmetric or skewed, And then you just have to look at these notes and figure out, oh, okay, I'm going to use that for the center and that for the variation. So we only have, I think, one example, two parts. No, we have two examples. Two examples here. So let's go ahead and get to example 1. Okay, example 1 has a dot plot. It says the dot plot shows the average number of hours students in a class sleep each night. I'll show you that in our books here. If I can get to our book. Here's our dot plot. This dot plot right here. Now, if we look at this dot plot, we're going to ask ourselves, is this dot plot skewed or is it symmetric? Now, if it looks to me like it's kind of gently rising here and then it drops off. So in my view, this looks like a skewed data set because it gently rises and then it drops off. So in our notes, let's do a quick little sketch of that. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so we've got a gentle rise, something like that, and then it kind of drops off like that. So this is a skewed to the left because our tail is on the left. But it really doesn't matter which way it's skewed to. The question says, what are the most appropriate measures to describe the center and the variation? Well, if we want to describe the center, look up here. If it's a skewed graph, we're going to use the median. Done. And then if we want to describe the variation here, we're going to use the IQR. Done. So question A is done. Then it says describe the center and the variation of the data set. So they want us to actually find the median and find the interquartile range. We're actually going to skip that part today because this lesson is really focusing on which one to pick. I know you know how to find the median, and I know you know how to find the IQR because we did that in our previous lessons in our other chapters. So I know you've got that down. So if we were back in chapter 9, I'd make you do that. But I'm just going to put B, find them. If you want to go ahead and practice finding them, I'm going to let you do that. If you don't want to, we can go ahead and just move on to example 2. If you did, you can pause the video right now and I'll tell you the answers if you'd like to. So pause and try it if you want to. Find the median and the IQR, interquartile range. Okay, so if you tried it, the data center around 8.5 hours, so the median is about 8.5, and the IQR would be 1.5. And our last one for this lesson, remember I told you it was short, is going to be example 2. Let's go ahead and look at our book first for example 2. Choosing appropriate measures again. It says the frequency table shows the number of states that border each state in the US. First, it says to display the data in a histogram. Thankfully, we can see the histogram right here, and it looks like it's gradually rising and gradually falling. So I would call this a symmetric graph. So it says display the data in a histogram. Here's our histogram. What are the most appropriate measures to describe the center and the variation? So we'll jot this little histogram down in our notes. I know that it gives us a table and it asks us to create the histogram, but this is not a lesson on creating the histogram. So here's our histogram. We already know how to do that, so we can make a sketch of it where it just gradually rises and gradually falls. Not perfect, but pretty symmetric. So we're going to call this symmetric. And question B asks, what are we going to use for the center? And what are we going to use to describe its variation? So let's go back up here and remind ourselves what we wrote down. When the graph is symmetric, we're going to use the mean and the MAD. The mean and the MAD, that doesn't sound good. The mean to describe the center and the mean absolute deviation, or MAD, to describe its variation. And that's kind of all that this extension lesson is about. We don't have any on your owns to try, but we will have a very short assignment for this one. So we're done with the extension.